of joiners has paused, so I think we have a great group here today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for being here for our webinar today, talking about can't I just fire them? We're going over why you shouldn't just fire all your employees and going over some great tips there of how you can manage what that process should look like in your business. So I'm Hannah Curtis. I'm with the North Metro Small Business Development Center. For those of you who aren't familiar with the SBDC, we help people who want to start their own business or they own their own business and need some guidance in various areas. So we have consultants with vast backgrounds who can kind of assist you along in whatever issues you're facing. And that is a completely free service, one-on-one consulting happening remotely right now. And then we also do educational programming like these webinars and our online courses as well. So I'll put some links to our resources in the chat if you want to take advantage of that consulting or any of our other upcoming programming. And with us today is Courtney Berg. She's one of our human resource specialists and has been with the SBDC for years. She's a fantastic resource, so we're so happy to have her with us. And before I turn it over to Courtney, I do want to mention that we are recording today's session. So later this afternoon, you will get a recording of the session along with the slides and any other resources that might be helpful. So you can always access that. And we do put those recordings in the video library on our website as well. So if you've missed any previous webinars and you want to check out that material, that content is in the video library on our website. And also feel free to drop any questions or comments into the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the presentation. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So we'd love to hear any questions or feedback you all have. So with that, Courtney, I will turn it over to you.
Well, Hannah, thank you and the North Metro SBDC for inviting me to speak today on Can't I Just Fire Them? Best practices for managing employee performance. I mean, we're an at-will state. Colorado's an at-will state, so why can't we just fire everybody? And you know, the bottom line is, yeah, we're an at-will state, but you have to prove that you didn't discriminate against somebody. So we're going to be talking through some of those things and documentation and what you can do to really bond with the employees and make that connection with them, as well as keep the company safe. So I grew up in Greeley, so I'm a Colorado native. I grew up in retail furniture, and after I graduated from college, I actually started working for State Farm Insurance, and I worked there for a number of years and moved up. So I was an underwriter, and then I became a supervisor of that team, and then I went into human resources, and then I went back out into operations, and then I left for a little while to go be a doctor. And then I came back and did some things with a nonprofit clinic, and I set up their HR department, and ultimately ended up in an ambulance service here in the Denver area and set up their HR department. They had 125 employees and no HR department. So it was great to have an opportunity to build all those systems and work with them. So when I'm speaking to you today, I'm coming from an operational perspective as well as an HR perspective. So I want the information that I'm giving you to be practical. And if you need more information than what I'm giving you, because we only have, you know, a short period of time together, you can set up a consulting gig with me. And Hannah, they just go online and do that, right?
I will, I can connect you and Courtney. I don't think we have Courtney's direct calendar link on our website since it's through a different system, but I'm happy to connect you with Courtney if you're looking for that extra assistance.
Okay, great. So this is going to be kind of a whirlwind tour through performance management. So let's talk about that. When you have an employee that has a problem, you start thinking about they're not performing. What do I need to do? And then you start thinking about if I have to discipline them and document all these things, that's a lot of work. And the first thing that usually happens is I have to recreate a timeline. You've got to sit down and think about when did their performance start deteriorating and what does that look like, right? And then you pull together all the emails and notes and you do that. And then you write a written warning, a draft of it. You hold multiple coaching meetings with this individual. and you document those meetings, and you finally do a final written. Does this sound familiar to everybody? This is kind of a process, right? This is what we do. I was working with a manager and I said, you know what? We're going to have to do a performance improvement plan with this individual. We've already done written warnings. We've already sat with them. And he actually looked at me and said, can I just fire them? Which is exactly where the title came from of this particular workshop. So yeah, that's what you worry about, because he said, I'm going to do all of these things. And then honestly, I'm either going to terminate them or they're going to resign anyway. So why am I going through all this work and performance management when they're going to leave anyway? Can't we just fire them? And the answer is no. So we're going to get into what coaching is, what discipline is, and some documentation. But first, I wanted to give you a history of performance management. Now, I know that sounds kind of strange, but when you look at this, it's really interesting. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was all about cash. So Taylor, F.W. Taylor, had the scientific management method. And what he decided was employees want to perform efficiently because then they'll get paid more. So he was all about pay. Cash is king. That's what happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s. At about the same time in manufacturing firms, they used what I'm calling the stick method. So supervisors at the end of the day would walk past the workbenches and they would place a blue stick for good job, a yellow stick for satisfactory, or a black stick for poor. And that's what they would do. And that's how they would give constant feedback. They would do that every single day. If somebody got a black stick, they're probably not going to be staying around very much. They knew they had to go. And this is all before the employment laws that we deal with on a daily basis. Now, in the 1920s, we had the Hawthorne experiments, and they generated ideas about performance management and looked at work groups and the roles of managers in motivating and managing performance. And so the Hawthorne experience in the 1920s came about, and later in the 60s and 70s, then we got the management by objectives. So what did they do? Everybody has a goal. This is where we're going. These are the goals that you're going to find. And then the latter half of the 1980s is when we start to see something that resembles what we're doing now. So that's just a little history of performance management. I guess the sticks were my favorite. I don't know if you want to implement that in your business. I'm not sure that that's really good feedback. I love the constant feedback. I love the daily feedback, but I think putting a stick on the workbench, I don't think that's really warm and inviting and relationship building. So I'm not sure that I would do that. So let's talk about the key components to performance management. Now, when we're looking at performance management, one of the easiest things to know is you're setting goals, right? You're setting expectations. So you need job descriptions. You need to have expectations. And what's the difference between job descriptions and expectations? When you have a job description, it talks about the roles and responsibilities of that particular position. These are the things you're going to do at work, right? The expectations may bleed into that a little bit, but a lot of those expectations are things that you've set for all of your staff. So I want you to be here on time. I want you to be here early. I want you to come prepared to start working. I want you to know our rules, read our handbook, understand what you need to do in your job. Those types of things are really important. You also may have project goals, in some cases behavior goals. So yeah, this behavior, we need to shift it just a little bit. And then stretch goals. Where do you want to be in 2 years? You know, how can we stretch your performance and get you to be more engaged at work and get you to where you want to be personally? Now, obviously, with all these goals, you want them to be SMART. And we hear that all the time: specific, measurable, actionable, reasonable, and time bound. So you want to make sure that you've got a specific goal. Not, you need to have a better attitude. That's not a specific goal. It may be exactly what they need, but what you have to do is actually have a conversation with them that says, these are the things that you need to do to prove that you have a better attitude. So you're very specific. And then you're saying things are measurable and they're actionable and they're reasonable and they're time bound, so that that employee understands what's important for them. After those goals and expectations are set, communicate, 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 right? I talk to people about starting to communicate the job description, the expectations way back in the interviewing process. even in the job ad, make sure that you're getting those expectations out there and you're being true about your culture and your what you're expecting from that job. So you want that to be very, very transparent as far as what you're going to have them do. That will cut down on people that are applying that maybe don't have the skill set you need. Okay. When you've set those expectations and you've talked about them in the interview process, and you've talked about them in the onboarding process, and you've talked about them in the training process of the new employee, then you need to have consistent follow-up and accountability. So this isn't a situation where you say, okay, I've got the job description, I've got the expectations, I gave it to them, I said it, I can forget it. We find that more often than not, employees look at that and say, I guess it really doesn't matter what I do. I've got this list, but I don't know if anybody else really looks at it. So I think I'm just going to do what I want and what I did in my old job. And that can create problems, right? So you need to continually work with the staff and continually talk to them to make sure that they understand what those expectations are and what the job description is, but then you're constantly following up and holding them accountable if they step out of line and step away from those expectations. Performance reviews are another thing that's a constant conversation throughout the year. In the past, what we've done is we've had maybe a 6-month performance review and an annual performance review and done very little conversation in between. And so the HR profession, I don't know, 10 years ago, went up in arms and said, okay, this is wrong. We need to have constant feedback for our employees. We need to be giving our employees constant feedback. And so this is how we're going to do that, rather than just meet with them twice a year and check boxes and write a few comments and then have them sign that and we put it in their personnel file. And so they said, that's what we have to do. And there was another group of HR professionals that said, no, we have to have that really formal document that says this is what they're doing. And we've got to put that in the personnel file. And these two sides fought with each other for several years. And I sat back and I watched and I thought, that's so strange. We could do both. We can have daily conversations, weekly conversations with our employees. And then we can do 6-month, 12-month reviews with our employees. So when you get to those 6-month and 12-month reviews, nothing is a surprise for the employee. Nothing. So they understand what they're supposed to do. They understand what they haven't done right. And they also get a summary of the last 6 months for what they've been doing. And then the last thing is performance improvement plans. And I've got a / performance roadmap. I think I'm on a one-person mission to get rid of PIPs. I want to get rid of performance improvement plans, because when you have performance improvement plans, what happens? You walk into the meeting, you sit down, you put it on the desk and you say, we're going to be putting you on a PIP. And right then the employee grabs their phone, starts updating their resume and starts applying on Indeed, right? Because they're like, you're just documenting this so I can be fired easier. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, that's what managers are doing. So when the supervisor asks, can I just fire them? Because all these things are true and they're just ultimately going to quit, or I'm going to fire them anyway. What I said is, look, the performance improvement plan is a roadmap, and it's a roadmap to their success. And this roadmap helps guide them to know exactly what they're supposed to do. What is the goal and objective? What are the action steps to meet that goal and objective? And it's very, very clear. And so the performance roadmap has worked in the companies that I've worked with them. We've put the performance roadmap in place and we've seen employees double their production. We've seen employees go from, I can't do anything, to, wow, I'm really doing a lot, and even being promoted to like a lead. So the performance roadmap is a non-threatening way to get them to turn their behavior around. PIPs don't work. Performance roadmaps do. So today, for the rest of the presentation, what we're going to cover is 3 things. We can't cover everything in performance management, but we're going to cover these 3 things. How do I know if it's a performance issue, right? Sometimes the employee is doing something and you're thinking, Is that a performance issue, or did they just forget, or what's going on with that? Were they sick that day? I don't understand what happened. And so we're gonna talk about that a little bit. To coach or discipline, that is the question. So do I coach the employee to fix their behavior, or do I need to go down a progressive discipline tunnel and actually get them to do the right thing? And honestly, it depends on what they're doing. So we'll have some time to talk about that. And then what documentation do I need? What do you need to put together? What notes do you need to have? Those kinds of things. So are there any questions or anything? This would be a great time to do that.
We don't have any in the chat right now, but like I mentioned, feel free to put any questions that you do have that come up, put those in the chat, or, we'll have some time at the end too. You can come off mute and verbally ask your question that way if you prefer.
You bet. You bet. So I think I might want him to come off mute. Here's my question. What kind of performance issues does everybody see, no matter what business you're in? What kind of things do you see in performance with employees? Don't be scared. You can do this. Right? It doesn't have to be your employees. It could be anybody's employees. Okay? Nope. No performance problems.
So
Okay.
I know for me in the past, I have had issues with respecting. So I would I would try to work with them in start time, and they still would not show up on time. And then it was my fault when I would say something. So it's that respect of that boundary, I guess.
Yeah. That is, time and attendance issues are huge. And we see it all the time, right? We see people that are just moseying on in. And we talk about generational differences, but I think it's COVID. I think COVID shifted a whole bunch of things. Now, I'm not going to say that the millennials and Generation Z and all of the people that are entering the workforce right now don't have some challenges with like getting to work on time. Okay. But I do think that COVID made people really think about, what am I doing with my life? And if they're not excited about their job, that's not going to be their priority, right?
There was another thought about that when they are starting to disengage, they stop following directions. Olga mentioned that that's what they've seen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're disengaged. You need to clean the tables off right after somebody leaves. Yeah, there's nobody in line. I can wait a couple of minutes, right? So they're not that person who's stepping up to do more. They're doing bare minimum. Well, let's look at a list I put together. Here's the list I put together. Quantity and quality of work, time and attendance, missing deadlines, poor communication, right? Have you seen these in your past or in your current life? I know I have. And when these things happen, managers sometimes look away, hoping that it's going to go away or cure itself. But typically it doesn't. Typically what happens is everybody gets more and more frustrated. So the employee thinks, I can do what I want. They're not going to do anything for me or about it. I can just do what I want. The other employees think, why doesn't the management team do something about it, that employee? He just thinks he can do whatever he wants, right? And the manager is thinking, I don't have energy or time to take care of an employee with a performance issue. There's just too much, right? So in those situations, what do we do? I go back to expectations. Are they meeting expectations? If somebody's constantly late, if somebody is disengaged, if somebody is not doing their roles and responsibilities, they're not meeting expectations. And when they don't meet expectations, you need to work with them. Now, you don't always need to discipline them, right? there was a situation. I was working with a medical office, and they hired a medical assistant with some experience. And they thought she would know what to do because she had some experience. So they brought her in, did minimal training, didn't really tell her how their computer system worked or how they roomed the patients or how they helped the patient out after the exam. And so the doctor started saying, this is really frustrating to me. And he got progressively frustrated, but he didn't document and he didn't talk to the employee. So he hit that point of progressive frustration where he called me and he said, hey, I think I need to fire her. So HR, being as popular as HR is, and yes, I do understand how popular HR is. What did I say? What do you think I said? I just said, is there any documentation, right? Do you have any documentation on what we need, what you're coaching this employee on? And he said, no, and I haven't ever talked to her, but I want to fire her. So I said, no. I wasn't a very popular person that day, but I said, let's set up a process where we're going to talk to her about her knowledge, skills, and abilities. So knowledge is what you know. Knowledge are those things that you have in your head. You've done some didactic training, you've read a lot of books, you've taken courses, you've got this knowledge in your head and you know how to use it. Skills are what you can do. I found a skier because I was thinking about cold weather. I don't know about anybody else, but I thought, wow, I think we need some cold weather. So here's a skier, right, who's doing great skills down the slope. Abilities are who you are. That's your makeup. So knowledge and skills are trainable. Abilities, that's much more difficult. So if I have a whole bunch of HR knowledge in my head. I have knowledge and I have skills. But if I couldn't speak in front of a group or do a webinar, I would not be able to do this presentation today because the ability would lock me down and I wouldn't want to do it. So even though I've got the knowledge and the skills, I don't have the ability. What you've got to do when people are not meeting your expectations is kind of figure out, is it a knowledge issue? Did we train them? Did we give them all the training and the tools and the support that they needed? Is it a skills issue? Did we think they had higher skill level when they came in and they don't? And so, they can't run a cash register. They can't make change. They can't draw blood, whatever that might be. And then is it an ability issue? They're quiet. They're shy. You're asking them to take a patient from a waiting room to a room, or you're asking them to work the front desk to meet your guests as they come into your business. And that is putting them through a kind of a torture because they don't have the ability to do that. That's not who they are at their core. So you've got to think about, is it a knowledge or skill issue that I can train? Now you still have to make a determination. Does it make sense to train them, right? Is their knowledge and skills so low that it would be easier to go find somebody with the knowledge and skills? Or, well, they've got the baseline knowledge and skills. I just need to train them up on our processes in our store, right? And then look at what abilities do they have? And do I have them in a job that matches those abilities or that is counter to those abilities? And so every day they're coming in, they hate their job. Does that make sense? Any questions? No.
I have a question, Courtney.
Okay.
I'm curious. You talked about the roadmap instead of a behavior improvement plan. What kind of timeline would you recommend giving a roadmap to get from point A to point B, or whatever that change is that you're looking for?
Yeah, so that really depends on the organization. When I used it with an employee who we decided a PIP would just totally disengage her, I gave it to her. Worked with her manager, we put it together and we gave it to her. We saw an immediate increase in her performance. Her manager came to me and said, can I have one? He didn't have any problem with his performance, but he saw the value to it. So that kind of opened up my mind where The performance roadmap isn't just for a PIP. You could actually give it to somebody when they start. You know, you outline the objectives you want them to meet and the action steps to get there, with some other things in there, talking about how their job is important, how their role is important to the organization, whatever resources they have at their disposal, those kinds of things. And you put that in the roadmap and you hand it to people when they walk in the door. Or you look at your 7 staff members and you say, I don't really have a job description, which, by the way, due to the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, you actually have to have now. That changed that legislation where we didn't have to have a job description in Colorado, but now we do.
Oh.
So you could look at the roadmap that outlines the exact expectations and what you want them to do. So I guess my answer, Hannah, is anytime. Right?
Great. Yeah. Yeah. That's good to know that it's adaptable and you can make it work for different situations. And that's great.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right.
And it's less threatening, right?
Yes.
It's not, here's your PIP. It's, here's your roadmap. Well, what the heck is that? I don't know what that is. Great. Let's talk about it. And it opens up that conversation with employees and they don't feel like they're getting yelled at or pushed out the door.
Yes. Yes. Bonnie asks, where do we find out more about a roadmap? So it sounds like maybe Bonnie's asking how she would create that sort of roadmap approach for one of her employees. Is that something that you could help a client with during a consultation?
Sure. Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
So Bonnie, I'll post Courtney's scheduling link again in the chat here, but since Courtney is one of our fabulous SBDC consultants, she does offer free one-on-one appointments that are remote. So you could work through that with Courtney in that way.
You bet. Happy to do it.
Great.
Anything else, Hannah?
No other questions right now.
Okay. Well, let's go on to a case study. So in this particular case study, there was an employee who had a positive attitude, had a really strong skill set, was striving for a promotion, and was eager to learn. Now, if that doesn't sound like a perfect employee, right? We all want to hire that person. That sounds great. Let's do that. Let's move to the next slide. So here's challenges. He can't get to work on time. He disappears for 20 to 30 minutes during his shift and nobody can find him. He has frequent personal emergencies that make him call out at the last moment or no call, no show for the shift. He's on the cell phone during the shift. He leaves his work for others to do. So basically he has a checklist of this is what I'm supposed to do. He gets done with like half of it. And then he says, oh, I've got to go. And he leaves and everybody else has to finish his work for that particular night. Right. And then he doesn't have good communication with the staff or the manager. So many times when he disappears during the shift, nobody knows that he left. When he leaves his work for others to do, he doesn't tell anybody. He has his checklist on his little table and he walks out. Right. Okay. So what do you do with this guy? What do you think? Well, Courtney, you're the HR expert. You should tell us. No, let's have a chat. What do you think? Is it a performance issue? What's your next move?
Olga put in the chat that motivate. Maybe you need to motivate them differently.
Motivate him differently. That's good. I like that. Okay. How would you do that? Any ideas? I know you guys are in the chat. I can see maybe a couple of you typing. You can just unmute yourself and talk if you'd like. Or not. So yeah, so what does that look like? So here's a performance issue. And what is your next move? This is where it gets into, do you coach them? Do you coach him or do you discipline him? So when you're doing coaching, a coaching scenario is typically the manager and the employee, right? And they start looking at a core issue. How come you're leaving during your shift? Help me understand what's going on. Now, in this particular case, it happened to be a problem at home, a health problem at home. And so when his wife would call, he would leave his post and go talk to his wife because he was concerned that she was having a health crisis. Okay. So you got to the core issue of that particular behavior, right? And the coaching improves that manager and employee relationship because you can say, okay, well, talk to me about what you could do instead. Like, how could we, could somebody else be on call when you're at work? Does she have a family member that could do that? You don't want to get into his personal stuff. You just want to help. Like, could somebody else be on call? Could you go through like, okay, this is the busiest time for my shift. If it's possible, don't call during that time, call during this window, right? So you can coach that employee to try to help their home situation. You're not a therapist. I just want to say that. You're not meant to be a therapist, so don't feel like you have to be, right? Now, when we get to discipline, coaching is a nurturing environment, right? It makes people feel good. They feel cared for. They feel valued because they're being coached. All right. Discipline is the manager and HR deciding what to do. HR is the Grim Reaper. It's just who we are. Usually I have my sickle in back of me, but it's just who we are. We address problematic activity. We need you to change this behavior. This behavior is not meeting expectations. Here's our expectations. We need you to change that behavior, right? It can actually damage the employee-manager relationship, especially if that employee is having a health problem with his loved one at home. Because then all of a sudden he's got pressure at work and pressure at home. So if you just go straight to discipline, you don't necessarily have all the information and you don't necessarily know what the core issue is. So that's why coaching is important, at least up front. It obviously creates a non-nurturing environment, right? Here, sit down. This is a written warning. I'm going to read it to you, and then you're going to sign it, and then you're going to go back to work, and you better do this stuff or I'm going to fire you. It's not warm and friendly. So you've got to work through whatever you need that employee to do and be transparent about it. But with discipline, you can do that in certain steps, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So let's talk about coaching. So coaching, encourage, right? Provide encouragement to the employee. Appreciate what the employee does bring to the job. Share with them how important they are to the team and that you want them to be successful. Now, a line that I use is, I know you can do this, and I'm here to support you as much as I can, but your ultimate success is up to you. So if there's anything I can do to help you, I want you to let me know. Let me tell you an example of what not to do in that particular conversation. I worked at an ambulance service, and one of the employees was having a lot of trouble getting there on time. And the way that the ambulance service worked, they had 12-hour shifts. And so this employee wasn't getting there, maybe 15, 20 minutes late. And so the other ambulance had to stay on the air. They had to stay out and floating around in case somebody got hurt until that employee got there. So he came in and his supervisor said, "What can I do to help you?" And the employee said, "Yeah, I need you to call me every morning that I work to wake me up." Okay. Yeah. I love the looks like, huh? Really? Laughing. Supervisor said, "Perfect. I'll do it." And did it for like 3 weeks. And then the supervisor got called out to a cardiac arrest. And the supervisor was working that cardiac arrest to save a patient at the time that they were supposed to call the employee. So the employee was late again. They were already on final written warning. So, the supervisor came to me and said, I think we have to fire them. And I said, okay. So we go into the termination meeting And the employee says, it's his fault. And I said, why is it his fault? And he said, because he didn't call me and he was supposed to call me. So ask them how you can help them be successful, but don't go overboard. Don't put yourself in a position where you're suddenly the problem if that employee doesn't stop doing the behavior you want him to stop or her to stop. Okay. Invite a self-appraisal. Ask for the employee's point of view on the situation, what they think they should do. Hey, you're always late. Let's talk about this. I know that you can get here on time because you have gotten here on time. And I want to make sure that we don't have any barriers to your success of getting here on time. What do you think? How do you think we can turn this into a positive, right? And don't let the employee say, well, I'm just always late. That doesn't work, right? There's got to be a solution somewhere. Ask a lot of questions to understand deeply what that employee is going through. So you're going to explore the situation. You're going to observe their verbal and nonverbal behaviors and reactions to make sure that you can see what they're thinking. And then reflect, right? This is active listening. You're going to reflect and be clear on what you are hearing the employee to say. Share your view of the situation. I think what you said is, if I call you, then you'll come to work on time. Unfortunately, that solution won't work because what if I'm out on a call? So how else could we do it? And troubleshoot with that employee, have it be a dialogue, right? And make sure that you understand what the employee is saying and that you put some things into works, write some things down as far as what can happen next, and then summarize the conversation with the employee. Okay, after our talk today, these are the 3 things we're going to do. Do you agree? Yes. Okay, great. All right. Any questions on coaching?
Jennifer put a question into the chat, wondering if you have any suggestions on where we can get a self-appraisal that you think is good to use. She really likes the idea.
Yeah, SurveyMonkey has one.
Oh, good to know.
So you can just name the appraisal Susie Smith self-appraisal, right? And send that link to Susie to fill it out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
There aren't any other questions right now.
Okay, well, we're going to go.
Oh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have another question. So
Yeah.
from my previous experience, people didn't like to hear that something wrong with them. So when you start pointing on the problems that you see as a supervisor or manager, they don't like to hear that. They say, oh, okay, you are too picky. So what to do in this kind of situation?
Yeah. I mean, that's tough, right? You're nitpicking, you're micromanaging, right? So if you have already talked to them about the expectations when they were hired and when you onboarded them and when you did their training, you can go back and say, no, actually, these were in your job description and were discussed when you were hired. So I'm not adding more expectations. I'm just holding you accountable to meet those, right? You've got to be careful to not micromanage. It's easy, especially if you've got an employee that is not performing well. It's easy to kind of jump down their throat and notice every little thing they do. And that's when employees are like, this isn't going to work for me, right? And so they'll probably leave. And when that institutional knowledge leaves your business, I've heard so many figures about how much it costs to replace an employee. The latest one was $4,250 or something like that. And I thought, I don't know what place they're replacing, but I don't think so, because you've got time to develop the ad, the job description, post the ad, review the applicants, have somebody to do overtime to cover the shift when somebody isn't there, right? Your time involved in vetting the candidates, interviewing process, orientation process, the onboarding process, right? All of those things add up to a lot of bucks. So you don't want to micromanage somebody out of the business, but you do want them to follow the expectations that you've laid down for them. And in some situations, when managers have laid a set of expectations down or roles and responsibilities down in a job description, they say, you know what, I need to add something or I need to change something. Which this is a good time to say, always have something in your job description that says, this is not a complete list of what you're doing. You know, as business needs arise, your job description could change. Okay. And then have them sign it, have them sign the job description and keep it in their personnel file. So in those situations, you want to be able to pull that out and say, hey, we talked about this. Here's the signed document. Help me understand what's going on. You're feeling micromanaged, but that's just actually something that has always been there. You're just not doing it. So what's happening? Like you don't have time, or you don't know how, or somebody else is doing it. Help me understand what's going on with this. Right.
Another question about coaching before we get into discipline, Courtney. Sounds like you were just mentioning some of those ways that you were documenting that process. Should all of your coaching attempts be documented? Like even when you have a conversation with them, should you in some way document that conversation happened?
Yes. And we're going to go to documentation right after discipline. So we'll talk
Great.
more about that in a minute. Okay. But the answer to that question is yes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. You bet. So what about discipline? Everybody's heard progressive discipline. It falls in and out of favor with HR people. What I like about progressive discipline is there's many steps. So awareness counseling is, hey, Susie, I noticed you were late today. Are you okay? You're normally not late. You doing okay? Right? What does that sound like? That sounds like I care. That sounds like I'm worried about them. It doesn't sound like I'm disciplining them at all. I'm making them aware of the fact that I knew they were late. The next one, if they continue to be late, is a verbal warning. And in that situation, it's, hey, you've been late 3 times this week. I know that we've talked about it briefly, but I'm going to need to give you a verbal warning. Tell me what's going on that can't get you to work on time, because you've always come in on time. Is there something going on that is preventing you from getting to work on time? And right now, mental health is a huge issue. People are unable to get out of bed. We're seeing it time and time again. They are concerned. They are scared. They're anxious. They're done with everything that's going on in the world. And so they just are not coming to work. And it's not because they want to defy you. It's not because they don't want to be at work. It's literally they physically cannot get up and come to work. And that's what we're seeing in some of the post-COVID anxiety that people are having. So mental health is huge. And just as an aside, we just as the USA, we just opened up a mental health crisis line and a suicide prevention line. And the number is 988. So it used to be that you'd have to dial 1-800, I don't know, whatever. And now it passed Congress and it rolled out right away, 988. So if you have an employee that's saying, I don't know what to do, I feel like I'm going to hurt myself, what you need to do is say, would you be okay to use my office to get in touch with a mental health counselor right away? And all you have to do is dial 988. That's all you have to do. And then put up posters around your workplace. Or if you have a remote workforce, make sure that that information is available to the employees on your website, into the employee portal or whatever. 988. So with discipline awareness counseling, verbal warning, you get into written warnings. People have always asked me, is there a magic number of written warnings? Is 3 the magic number? Like we'll do 2 written warnings and then a final? Maybe. It could be that you're going to go right to a final. It could be that you're going to go right to termination. So what you want to do is not put this progressive discipline in a policy manual that says, this is how we discipline our employees. You want to put a line in your policy manual that says, we discipline employees based on manager's discretion from the infraction that occurred, right? So you want to make sure that you're holding that in your discretion and comparing it to what happened. So if you know that somebody sexually harassed somebody and it was blatant, you don't have to go through awareness counseling, verbal warning, written warnings. You can go ahead and terminate them if your investigation shows that you should. The other example that I use is if somebody comes in and hits an employee in the face, if one of your employees hits another employee in the face, you don't want to say, hey, Joe, I just want to make you aware that we don't hit each other at work, right? You don't want to have to do awareness counseling in that situation. You want to be able to terminate them if that's what you want to do, or a final written. Now, whatever that employee that was assaulted and battered wants to do, that's up to them. So you've got to figure out how do you want to handle that. It gets tricky when there are restraining orders inside a small business and people say that person, offended me or excuse me, caused a problem for me, and sexually harassed me. So I put a restraining order in place and I can't be within 150 yards of him, and your office is not that big. So what happens there? And that's when I would say that's a situation you need to take to an attorney to make sure that you're not doing anything wrong. Okay. All right, discipline. Are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. So documentation. This is where it can get a little crazy. You want to summarize previous meetings. So you want to say, we met on these dates, we talked about these things, you said you'd do these things, you didn't do those things, right? All objective, not subjective. Everything's objective. You want to summarize the issues with the performance. We're experiencing a tardiness issue, a late, no call, no show, late call outs, poor attendance. You've worked for us for 3 months and you've missed, 60 days. Well, that's not going to work, right? You want to summarize the actions taken to assist the employee. We talked on these dates. I gave you these things. You said you were going to do X, right? And then you want to summarize that performance after the warnings are given. After I gave you all these things, you did these things. And if you're terminating the employee, or if the employee is quitting, so either way, you're terminating the employee, you need to provide the unemployment insurance notification. So if you go to Google and you Google Colorado unemployment insurance notification, you'll get a list of what you need to provide in that document. And that needs to go to everybody who terminates. Okay. Any questions on that?
Can you repeat that the Google, what did you say?
Yeah, so I would just enter for Google Colorado unemployment insurance notification or required notification. This just came to be the end of May. Not a lot of people are doing it because nobody, well, not nobody, very few business owners paid any attention to this. So if somebody quits, when they leave, you need to provide them this letter. And it has information about the unemployment insurance where they can file the claim. And then the last thing I think is, why did they leave or why did they terminate? And the attorney that I work with the most said, be as vague as possible with that until they have some rulings on it. So it could be job performance. It could be terminated for job performance. It could be employee quit to take another job, right? Be vague. And then watch for whatever is coming out in the interpretation of this law, because I'm sure that we'll have more rulings on it in the future. Okay. So when do you move from coaching to discipline? I guess I would say when coaching isn't working. And what do I mean like that? Like they're not implementing the things that you're asking them to implement. They're not implementing the things they say they want to implement. You're having the same conversation every week with them. Their production isn't improving. So you're seeing just a circle of performance. Just, they're not going anywhere. They're just going in circles. And then how you make the transition is, I would say, I would have a meeting with them and I would say, look, we haven't seen great success from coaching. I know you can do this and I'm here to support you. but you're going to have to make a change. Your performance is going to have to change. As such, I've got a written warning here that we're going to go through, because I'm wondering if maybe the expectations aren't clear. And so this written warning is very clear in the expectations. And what I do in those situations is I work the written warning out. I have 2 copies in front of me. And I say to the employee, I'm going to give you a copy of this, but I'm not going to give it to you right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read from this document and use it as an outline to have the discussion, but I want it to be a dialogue back and forth. If I handed you this document right now, you wouldn't hear me at all. You would just read the document. So let's walk through it together and then I'll give you a copy. Okay. You need to have wet signatures on those documents if you can. You can also use DocuSign and those kinds of things as well, if you have remote employees. Okay. Okay, so what are we saying? We're saying that coaching is forward moving. You're looking ahead. You want them to succeed. You want them to advance. So you're looking ahead and trying to give them the tools and the knowledge and the skills to do that. Discipline looks back at past behavior. You're not meeting expectations. This is the behavior that isn't meeting expectations. We need to make a change. Coaching is nurturing. Discipline can be hostile. Now, when I typed this, I thought, really? But I think it can be. It depends on how it's done. So if you haven't done a lot of discipline with anybody, sometimes you can come across because you're scared, and you can come across just like you need to do this and you have to do this and you're not yourself. And so the employee doesn't feel comfortable at all. So try to practice if you're doing that with an employee, so it doesn't sound hostile. Coaching is inquisitive, discipline is directive. Ask questions, find out more, get to the root of the problem, gather information, explore the information. Discipline is, this is what you need to do to save your job. Okay. And coaching builds that manager-employee relationship, and discipline damages the manager and employee relationship. Okay. All right. Questions?
One question I have, I know we've seen from many business owners, given the industry in the market right now, is I think they're so scared to even go down the road of coaching with an employee, because they're doing everything they can just to keep employees, to keep the business running and doors open. So what kind of advice do you have to a business owner who has not been addressing any issues for fear, that their employees would leave them, but is now realizing they need to start, implementing some kind of behavior modification? What advice would you give?
That's a great question, Hannah. It happens a lot because there's not the talent out there that we want, and we can't find it. So what I would do is realize that you want to work with that employee as much as you can. You want to coach them as much as you can. Even if you have to discipline, you want to do that while telling them, hey, I think you can do that. I feel that you can do this. I believe in you, right? But do keep in mind that if you're not taking care of performance problems, all the other employees are seeing it. And I have seen employees, good employees, leave this year, organizations in droves, because people weren't taking care of performance issues inside the organization. So whereas you might lose one employee, 5 employees are walking out the door because you're not taking care of that one problem. So you've got to weigh that, and you've got to say, okay, what do I want to do to protect my business and protect the employees that are doing their job? And just, I would probably go into a staff meeting with everybody and say, hey, you know what I realized? I realized that I really haven't been strong on accountability. And so I'm going to push the reset button on that. And I'm going to be talking to all of you about what you're supposed to be doing and how you're doing it. Not micromanaging you, but I want to make sure that we're on the same page and have a shared understanding of your job, of your day-to-day activities, of your priorities. I want to be a resource for you so that you can excel where you are. And the only way to do that is to have conversation with each other. So I'm pushing the reset button, and we're going to have those accountability conversations in our one-on-ones on a weekly basis or whatever.
Hmm.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
I kind of have a follow-up question to that. So how do you address, if I guess if somebody is, when you've had a conversation with an employee and that's private, that like everybody else doesn't need to know that, they're like, to let the other employees know you are addressing it without, you know, sharing that information? I don't know. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, you can't, right? There's privacy laws that protect that employee. So you can't tell, hey, Joe, I'm coming down on Susie. I just want you to know. You can't do it.
Any
right?
suggestions for languaging just in general?
So here's what I've said. And this happens at termination too. Like, you just terminated Susie. Like, you haven't even written her up. Okay. I am not allowed to talk to you about other employees' performance or actions that were taken with other employees, employment actions. Just as I am not going to talk about any kind of employment actions I take with you. If you're concerned about your performance and you are afraid that I've got a dartboard in my office and I'm just throwing darts and letting people go, maybe that's a little sarcastic. So what you want to say is, you know, if you're concerned about that, please come talk to me so we can talk about your performance. Okay, so you put the focus back on them.
Thank you.
Okay.
So along those same lines, I assume that employee has the right to be able to talk to other employees about what's going on, right? There's nothing we can do about that.
Even if they lie.
Okay. All right.
The National Labor Relations Board, which is the board that takes care of union employees, also takes care of non-union employees to allow them to have conversations about their boss, conversations about their work, whatever. Now, there's some restrictions on there, but the bottom line is you can't prevent them from having those conversations. You can't tell them they can't discuss their pay. That's a legal right in Colorado. And you have to put the range of pay on your job postings now and the summary of benefits. So those numbers are already out there and on your job descriptions for that matter. So those numbers are already out there. So it can get a little hairy. Yeah.
There was another question about a situation where there was a disagreement between employees and essentially one of the employees stopped coming in to work and didn't give notice about that. The question is there a requirement for how many days you have to wait to terminate an employee?
So have a policy that says if you have 3 days business days in a row where you no call, no show, we're going to assume that you voluntarily resigned your position. So have that in a policy. Now there's a little bit of a nuance because it used to be 3 days. If somebody was gone 3 days for an illness, you could ask for a doctor's note. The Healthy Families and Workplaces Act now says 4 days. They have to be gone 4 days before you can ask for a doctor's note. So if you want to increase 3 days to 4 days, I've got a client that said, no, we're doing 2 days. You know, I mean, whatever that is, just have a policy that states after this number of days that you no call, no show, we're going to terminate your employment as a voluntary resignation because you're not getting back in touch with us. Then what you need to do before that, you need to obviously reach out to the employee, try to text them, send emails, you know, and then when you terminate, send a registered receipt through the USPS. And what that does is it doesn't require a signature at the door, but it requires the post office, the postal delivery person, to sign something that says, I delivered this document to this house. And then you keep that in the file.
Good to know. Thank you.
You bet.
Courtney, as a small business owner, I'm curious, where can I find a set of rules or regulations, let's say, for the business, for employers? So when I do the warning or some discipline or termination, I don't go against the law. So I put everything in the right direction. Maybe there is like templates for the documents.
Yeah, there is. If you go to the cdle.gov, Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, And Hannah, you're looking for the new employer checklist in Colorado. This is a lot of information about the laws you have to follow as an employer. It's written as though you don't have any employees, so there's some things that don't apply to you. But you want to, yeah. I don't know. I mean, cdle.gov is like the main site. Hannah, I'm not sure. If you Google Colorado new employer checklist, you're going to get the exact URL, I think. And I think that that would be helpful to look at that. You bet.
Great. I'll put that. This is the checklist link in the chat there for everyone. Well, thank you so much. Those were some great questions and really great content. Never fun to have to go through this process, but so much easier when you have a game plan before you go into it. And so this will really help us all prepare for those types of situations. So again, all of this information will be coming to you in a follow-up email this afternoon. And we encourage you to make appointments with the SBDC, with Courtney or any of our other SBDC consultants. And Courtney, is there anything else that we should mention today? Oh, you're on mute there.
Okay, I don't think so. Thank you all for attending. I appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions, just you know, let me know and you can go through Hannah to make that happen.
Great. Well, thank you, Courtney, so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we wish you a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.